Hello, everyone. Dr. Mad here. Let's get mad about A Christmas Carol. So we're carrying on with Stave 1, and we left off here. The same face, the very same. Marley in his pigtail, usual waistcoat, tights and boots, the tassels on the latter bristling like his pigtail, and his coat skirts, and the hair upon his head. The chain he drew was clasped about his middle. It was long and wound about him like a tail, and it was made, for Scrooge observed it closely, of cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, and heavy purses wrought in steel. His body was transparent, so that Scrooge, observing him and looking through his waistcoat, could see the two buttons on his coat behind. So, definitely Marley's face. We know he's got pigtails, a waistcoat, so tassels are those tiny kind of decorative things. In this case, on boots. So latter means the last thing that was mentioned. So the last thing that was mentioned was boots. So the boots have got tassels on them. Bristling means kind of standing up, stiff. And like his pigtail, so his pigtail is also stiff and standing up. Coat skirt. So in those days, men's coats at the bottom would sometimes look like skirts, and the hair upon his head. So all these things are bristling, are standing up, stiff. And he's got a chain around him and round about him like a tail. And on the chain are all these things: cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers. So these are like accounting books. Deeds are legal documents, usually about property. Heavy purses, wrought means made in steel. So if you notice, he's wrapped around with chains with things to do with money and property and business, and they're all weighing him down. And that's important, as we'll see in a minute. And his body was transparent, which means that Scrooge could see through his body. So clearly, he can't be real. Yeah, he's a ghost. So that Scrooge could see the two buttons on his coat behind his back. Scrooge had often heard it said that Marley had no bowels, but he had never believed it. And what this is a metaphor. So bowels are your intestines, but also just generally your kind of stomach area. And what this is saying is a metaphor to say that Marley had no feelings. So because quite often we have our feelings in our kind of stomach area, and of course the heart. But in the Bible and in ancient kind of Greece and so on, the emotions were supposed to be held in the stomach, in the bowels. And but Scrooge had never believed it, but until now. But here he means it literally that because he can see through Marley, obviously there's nothing inside. There's no bowels inside him. No, nor did he believe it even now. So actually, that's sort of contradicting the previous sentence, but it doesn't matter. Though he looked the phantom through, and saw it standing before him, though he felt the chilling influence of his death cold eyes, and marked the very texture of the folded kerchief bound about its head and chin, which wrapper he had not observed before, he was still incredulous and fought against his senses. What this really means is that he doesn't believe that he's seeing Marley. He thinks it's just his imagination. Okay? Kerchief is another word for handkerchief, but slightly different. With a handkerchief, you normally would use it for cleaning your nose or whatever. With a kerchief, it's something that you put on your head, maybe you wrap it around your head and forehead. So he doesn't believe what he's seeing. How now, said Scrooge, caustic and cold as ever. What do you want with me? Caustic means something that can burn. Much, Marley's voice, no doubt about it. Who are you? Asked me who I was. Who were you then? Said Scrooge, raising his voice. You're particular for a shade. He was going to say to a shade, but substituted this as more appropriate. And then here he's saying, "Oh, you're fussy for a so shade here means ghost." And then this is a bit of humor from Dickens. Shade also obviously means a dark area. It's just being funny that, oh, you're very fussy to the smallest extent, if you like. Okay. In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley. Can you can you sit down? Asked Scrooge, looking doubtfully at him. I can. Do it then. Scrooge asked the question because he didn't know whether a ghost so transparent might find himself in a condition to take a chair, and felt that in the event of its being impossible, it might involve the necessity of an embarrassing explanation. But the ghost sat down on the opposite side of the fireplace as if he were quite used to it. And then here, he's Scrooge is implying that he doesn't know whether a ghost can sit down or not, or would want to or need to sit down. And if it can't, then basically, Scrooge still doesn't believe or doesn't want to believe that he's seeing a ghost. So if it's some kind of a trick, somebody playing a trick, then they would have to explain why it can't sit down. But actually, the ghost does sit down. You don't believe in me, observed the ghost. I don't, said Scrooge. What evidence would you have of my reality beyond that of your senses? So, in other words, why don't you believe me? You can see me, can't you? And you're talking to me. I don't know, said Scrooge. Why do you doubt your senses? Because, said Scrooge, a little thing affects them. A slight disorder of the stomach makes them cheat. You may be an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of an underdone potato. There's more of gravy than of grave about you, whatever you are. And then Scrooge says the reason he doesn't believe it is that he's thinking, oh, he might have gone to sleep and he's just dreaming. And you quite often dreams come about because you're ill or something, or you've eaten something bad. So he's saying all these bad things that he might have eaten is causing him to dream about this ghost. And then here's a bit of humor from Dickens, a pun on the word grave and gravy. So obviously gravy, you know what gravy is, what you eat with your dinner, the sauce that you put onto your meal, and grave is where dead bodies come from. So he's saying you're more likely caused by the gravy I had for dinner rather than a ghost from the grave, from your grave. Scrooge was not much in the habit of cracking jokes, nor did he feel in his heart by any means waggish then. The truth is that he tried to be smart as a means of distracting his own attention and keeping down his terror, for the spectre's voice disturbed the very marrow in his bones. So, as it says here, Scrooge doesn't usually make jokes, and actually, he's not feeling very jokish right now. Waggish means so jokey. He's just using jokes, as we all do sometimes. If we're scared or nervous, we use humor to distract ourselves and to control his terror. Spectre is another word for ghost, and marrow is the kind of soft bit inside your bones. So he's scared right down to the inside of his bones. To sit staring at those fixed, glazed eyes in silence for a moment would play, Scrooge felt, the very deuce with him. There was something very awful, too, in the spectre's being provided with an infernal atmosphere of its own. Scrooge could not feel it himself, but this was clearly the case, for though the ghost sat perfectly motionless, its hair and skirts and tassels were still agitated as by the hot vapour from an oven. So he's saying that to sit there and just look at these eyes, which are fixed, and glazed means not showing any expression or emotion. Deuce means is another word for the devil. So Scrooge is saying if he just sits there and looks at these eyes, it's like the devil will get to him. And spectre is another word for ghost. Infernal means to do with hell, so devil and hell. So what he's saying here is that it's as though the ghost is surrounded by an atmosphere from hell. Okay, so he's saying that he can't feel the atmosphere himself, but he can kind of detect it because although the ghost is sitting there without moving. His hair, the skirts and tassels are kind of standing up, are disturbed and maybe moving around as if by the hot vapor from an oven. So obviously an oven is very hot, just like hell is hot. Okay. You see this toothpick, said Scrooge, returning quickly to the charge for the reason just assigned, and wishing that it were only for a second to divert the vision's stony gaze from himself. And then when he says this, he's just trying to distract the ghost's attention towards the toothpick, but he's also going to make another point about the toothpick, which we'll see. I do, replied the ghost. You are not looking at it, said Scrooge. But I see it, said the ghost, notwithstanding, which means even so. Well, returned Scrooge, I have but to swallow this, and be for the rest of my days persecuted by a legion of goblins, all of my own creation. Humbug, I tell you, humbug. So what he's saying here is that if I swallow this toothpick, then for the rest of my life I'll be disturbed by dreams and nightmares. So goblin is an imaginary, ugly, mischievous creature. At this the spirit raised a frightful cry and shook his chain with such a dismal and appalling noise that Scrooge held on tight to his chair to save himself from falling in a swoon. But how much greater was his horror when the phantom, taking off the bandage round its head, as if it were too warm to wear indoors, its lower jaw dropped down upon its breast. And then here the spirit cries out, shakes his chains. This means sad and gloomy. Appalling means horrifying. And the cry is so terrifying that Scrooge almost falls over in a faint. So swoon means to faint. But then, even worse, is that the ghost takes off the bandage around its head and its jaws kind of falls onto his chest. So breast means chest. Okay. Scrooge fell upon his knees and clasped his hands before his face. Mercy, he said. Dreadful apparition, why do you trouble me? Man of the worldly mind, replied the ghost. Do you believe in me or not? So Scrooge falls upon his knees, puts his hands to his face. Apparition is something that appears out of nowhere. And worldly mind saying, so the ghost says, oh, you only believe in things of the world. Yeah. And he said, do you believe in me or not? I do, said Scrooge. I must. But why do spirits walk the earth and why do they come to me? So he says, okay, finally, he does believe in him. But why are you here? Why are you talking to me? It is required of every man, the ghost returned, that the spirit within him should walk abroad among his fellow men and travel far and wide. And if that spirit goes not forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death. It is doomed to wander through the world. Oh, woe is me! And witness what it cannot share, but it might have shared on earth and turned to happiness. So he's saying here that what you're supposed to do when you're alive is to walk around, to visit people, to be sociable and travel far and wide, right? And if you don't do that while you're alive, then you'll have to do it after you're dead. And here he's just using an exclamation, Dickens, and he's saying, and you have to go around and see and witness what you can no longer share. But if you had shared it when you were on earth, when you were alive, you would have been happy. Again the spectre raised a cry and shook its chain and wrung its shadowy hands. You are fettered, said Scrooge, trembling. Tell me why. So fettered is another word for chained. I wear the chain I forged in life, replied the ghost. I made it link by link and yard by yard. I girded it on of my own free will, and of my own free will I wore it. Is its pattern strange to you? And the ghost says that I made these chains myself. In other words, that his bad deed, the fact that he wasn't sociable and generous with his money, he made these chains himself, link by link, Gird means to prepare or circle around. So he's prepared these chains and circled them around himself by his own actions. So on the one hand, they're kind of metaphorical, but after life, they've almost become physical, strangely enough, ironically enough. Okay. They're weighing him down. Whether you see them as physical or literal or metaphorical is up to you, but they are weighing him down. And then when he says, is its pattern strange to you? That's a rhetorical question, which implies that actually Scrooge does recognize the chains, or he will do, because he's doing the same thing to himself. Scrooge trembled more and more. Or would you know, pursued the ghost, the weight and length of the strong coil you bear yourself? It was full as heavy and as long as this, 7 Christmas Eves ago. You have labored on it since. It is a ponderous chain. And here, another rhetorical question saying that you can recognize this coil because you've got it inside you as well. And he's saying that, in fact, it was as heavy 7 years ago when Marley was alive. Okay, so there he's talking literally. He could see, looking back now, he can see that Scrooge was building these chains in the same way that Marley was. And he's saying, you have worked on it since. In other words, the chain has got even bigger and heavier since. So ponderous means heavy and clumsy. Scrooge glanced about him on the floor in the expectation of finding himself surrounded by some 50 or 60 fathoms of iron cable, but he could see nothing. And then Scrooge looks down as though expecting to see these chains, but obviously in his case you can see they are metaphorical, they're mental and emotional, not physical. So fathom is a unit of distance, it's about 1.8 meters, but obviously he can't see them because they're not physical in his case. Jacob, he said imploringly, old Jacob Marley, tell me more. Speak comfort to me, Jacob. So implore means to beg. It says, speak comfort, tell me something good, something that will comfort me. I have none to give, the ghost replied. It comes from other regions, Ebenezer Scrooge, and is conveyed by other ministers to other kinds of men. Nor can I tell you what I would. A very little more is all permitted to me. I cannot rest. I cannot stay. I cannot linger anywhere. My spirit never walked beyond our counting house. Mark me. In life, my spirit never roved beyond the narrow limits of our money changing hole, and weary journeys lie before me. And the ghost says, I have no comfort to give. Comfort comes from other places. In other words, more like heaven, more from good places, and is given by other ministers. So, like good people. At that time, he would have implied religious people. Obviously, not only religious people can be good, all kinds of people can be good, but at that time, to call somebody religious was like saying they are good people, and to other kinds of men, to good men, to good people. And then he says that he's not allowed to say much more. He would like to say more, but he can't. And here he's saying, I don't have much more time. I'm not allowed to rest. I can't stay. Linger means to hang around. I can't hang around. And he's saying, in life, I never went beyond our office. I never roved, means to travel, beyond our money changing hole. And obviously now he's regretting it, right? And weary journeys lie before me. So here we can see what they did for a living. So money lending, money changing, maybe pawnbrokers. It doesn't really matter what they did. Is they're obsessed with money and business. It was a habit with Scrooge, whenever he became thoughtful, to put his hands in his breeches pockets. Pondering on what the ghost had said, he did so now, but without lifting up his eyes or getting off his knees. So here, breeches means trousers, old word for trousers. So he puts his hands in his pockets. Pondering means to think about deeply. So he's now thinking deeply, and he's still on his knees, remember? Okay. You must have been very slow about it, Jacob, Scrooge observed in a businesslike manner. though with humility and deference. Slow, the ghost repeated. 7 years dead, mused Scrooge, and travelling all the time. The whole time, said the ghost. No rest, no peace, incessant torture of remorse. You travel fast, said Scrooge. On the wings of the wind, replied the ghost. You might have got over a great quantity of ground in 7 years, said Scrooge. So here, in the next few lines, Scrooge is trying to be a bit funnier still trying to come to terms with what's happening here. So he's saying, oh, you must have been very slow traveling around, and the ghost isn't sure what he's saying. And Scrooge says, oh, you've been traveling for 7 years? And the ghost says, yes, no rest, no peace. This means non-stop, and remorse means regret, sad regret. And he says, do you travel fast? And the ghost says, yes, on the wings of the wind. And yeah, so Scrooge is still being funny here, saying, oh, you must have traveled a lot of ground in 7 years. And at this, the ghost, on hearing this, set up another cry and clanked his chain so hideously in the dead silence of the night that the ward would have been justified in indicting it for a nuisance. So obviously, at this point, the ghost realizes what Scrooge is up to, starts screaming again, clanking his chain, and the ward is probably talking about the caretaker, saying would have been justified in to indict means to charge with a criminal act, right? For being a nuisance. Oh, captive, bound, and double ironed, cried the phantom, not to know that ages of incessant labour by immortal creatures for this earth must pass into eternity before the good of which it is susceptible is all developed, not to know that any Christian spirit, working kindly in its little sphere, whatever it may be, will find its mortal life too short for its vast means of usefulness, not to know that no space of regret can make amends for one life's opportunity misused. Yet such was I. Oh, such was I. So this paragraph is quite tricky to understand. Don't worry too much if you don't understand all of it. You don't need to understand every single line, but let's try and work it out. So he's obviously talking about to himself, and he's saying that he wishes that he couldn't, that he didn't know, hadn't experienced, wasn't experiencing this unceasing, non-stop labor by immortal. So obviously, after you're dead, then according to religion, you live forever. So he's having to experience this non-stop labor until the end of time. So this next bit here, he's saying that it's going to take a long time for the world to become aware of how much good it can do. And until that happens, he has to keep wandering, and all the bad people have to keep wandering as ghosts. And the next sentence here saying that if only he had known that a Christian spirit, in other words, a good person, working, being kind in its own little area of life, whatever that might be, would find that life is not long enough, it's too short to realize how much good you can do for other people. And not to know that if you don't do that, no amount of regretting will make up for it. Yet such was I, oh, such was I. So he's saying he was that person, or that kind of a person. Okay, so we'll stop the video there, maybe give you a bit of time to digest that paragraph and the whole video. And we're almost at the end of stave 1, so we'll finish that in the next video. The only thing left to say, as always, if you found this video useful, please do subscribe and tell all your friends about it. And see you in the next video, the last one for stave 1.